I met my wife in grad school. We really hit it off, and we were essentially inseparable from day one. The intimacy at the beginning was decent. It was vanilla, but fairly frequent and enjoyable. This actually was a nice change of pace for me, because ironically, my partner for 3+ years before her, my second ever long-term relationship, was asexual, and we hardly ever had intimacy, even in the beginning. So, especially compared to that, it was great. My first long-term relationship was in undergrad with a girl who was raised Catholic. So she wasn't super intimacy either due to her religious upbringing. All this to say, I've had nothing but unique experiences with every single one of my long-term female partners and their relationship with intimacy. My wife and I have made a great team over the last 10 years and really built a life together. We don't have any children, just a dog. We bought a house together in April of 2020, got an incredible deal and rate. We started out, I was a teacher in the inner city, and told her to quit her job her final year of school, and I'd support her so she could focus on school. And once she graduated, I kept supporting both of us for 6 more months, until she could find a job. I was the primary breadwinner and was supporting her in her career, as it did have long-term upward mobility that would eventually pay off. Around late 2020 or early 2021 was when she started making more than me. By 2022, she made 40% more than me. I quit teaching in the summer of 2022 to get a remote job like hers. She supported the two of us until I got hired in November of 2022 and began working in January of 2023. I had to take an initial pay cut as it was a step back career-wise, but it allows for much more upward growth than teaching ever did. My wife just last week took a new position with a new company, and she now makes 150% more than I do. She's really doing well for herself, and we live a very comfortable and easy lifestyle, a clear contrast to our humble roots, both growing up and starting out together. We both enjoy many of the same kinds of things, including classical music, jazz, world cultures, and cuisines, and especially traveling. We absolutely love traveling to Hawaii and go there 2 to 3 times a year over the last 8 years or so, though we've never had intimacy there. Now that we both have remote jobs that pay well, we have been wanting to move there in 2024 if at all possible. I say all of this in this paragraph to show that so many things are good for us, and we are a good team that has each other's backs. I do love her a lot, and we've really invested in each other. My wife is quite the introvert and doesn't mind alone time. She's a big video gamer and will spend a lot of time alone playing video games. She never plays them online or with others, though. She also likes to play mindless video games from her childhood, over and over. She's pretty quirky and socially awkward, too. She also suffers from a lot of social anxiety and tells me how draining it is when she's around a bunch of people, and that she worries she is weird around them. Sometimes I think she may be slightly on the spectrum, and while I'm not a trained psychologist, I was a teacher for 15 years and interacted every single day with numerous students that were on the spectrum. After the honeymoon phase of our relationship ended with my wife, the intimacy lost its frequency, and she seemed less and less open to it. I have always initiated intimacy every single time, no exaggeration, in our 10 years together. I tried everything I could to see what turned her on or could get her going. I bought a variety of intimacy toys, tried to watch porn, had conversations to see if she had any turn-ons or fantasies. Nothing. She basically told me that it gave her anxiety thinking I was trying to initiate intimacy, or something I was doing may lead to intimacy. This is when alarm bells went off in my head about the possibility she was asexual or had intimacy trauma. Turns out, it's both. More on that in a moment. She became less and less interested in physical touch and cuddling. She would tell me I was smothering her. She felt smothered, literally not figuratively, when we cuddled. Physical touch is my love language, so I feel sad and empty inside without it, and without hugs, cuddling, etc. She never sits beside me on the couch or holds my hand or anything. Physical touch doesn't do anything for her, and she doesn't crave it, not even a hug. That's hard for me to comprehend, but I do know touch-averse people are out there. I also think her hesitancy to physical touch is due to the fact that it could sometimes lead to intimacy, which gave her great anxiety, as I mentioned above. So I stopped seeking any kind of physical touch from her whatsoever, especially since it gives her anxiety that it could lead to intimacy. We do still share a bed, a large king bed which we sleep on far opposite sides of. During the early part of the pandemic, we hit a really rough patch. I was working very long hours in a very stressful and draining job, and she was alone working from home. I'd come home and would be emotionally and physically drained. I wasn't a good partner because I wasn't emotionally available, and I also didn't feel connected to her. She ended up having an emotional affair, mostly via telephone text, with a coworker that she knew from when they worked together in person. It was never intimacy, though. At the very same time, and apart from the emotional affair she had, I was already feeling unloved and undesired. Not having intimacy with me felt like I was being rejected and contributed to the feelings of not being loved or wanted and not sexually desired. It really hurt. Further intimacy is how I connect emotionally with a partner, how I make myself vulnerable, how I express love. It really opens me up and makes me comfortable in being emotionally open to connect. However, when I expressed interest in intimacy, she would tell me to go watch porn or self-intimacy. And when I told her it wasn't nearly as fulfilling or good, she truly could not comprehend that. She has told me that she somewhat views me, but I think she means allosexuals as Neanderthal, caveman, that we are motivated by our very basic primitive needs. This made me so sad inside. We decided to go to couples counseling, which we were in for a year. We worked through many things, including her emotional affair, and I forgave her. During our time in couples therapy, we confirmed our suspicions that she was asexual and touch-averse. She does claim to be romantic, though. I understand you can have romance without intimacy, but it's hard for me if it's never going to happen. In counseling, we discussed her childhood, which was chaotic and emotionally hurtful, but never physical sexual. We also discussed her one intimacy trauma she had experienced, which also I knew the details of already, which her one intimacy partner, immediately previous to me, continued to have intimacy with her, even though she revoked consent midway through intimacy. I have always felt awful that happened to her and made me want to go beat the dude up and cut his junk off. I can understand how this could contribute to someone having issues with intimacy, but in our couples therapy, it was clear the issue was far deeper than that. My wife says that intimacy does feel good in the moment, but it's nothing she ever craves. She doesn't even self-intimacy, and she's more of a get to orgasm and get it over with kind of person. She never wants to draw it out ever. She also hates receiving and giving oral intimacy. So my options in giving her pleasure are limited to penetration, while she uses a magic wand vibrator to climax. That's all intimacy has been, is her lying on her back using her vibrator, while I hope to get off before she does, because once she gets off, it's over. My wife also refuses to give oral intimacy, in addition to refusing to receive it. It makes me sad because I love giving pleasure, and it makes me happy and feel connected to my partner. Since my wife expressed that intimacy did feel good to her, or at least didn't feel bad, our counselor suggested we still have intimacy anyways and kind of make a habit out of it, and hopefully that would improve it, along with going on regular dates, etc. I couldn't get on board with this. I feel like consent should be enthusiastic. I don't want someone having intimacy with me just because, especially if they are asexual and don't really want it or crave it. I do understand some asexuals are not sex-averse. I feel my wife is somewhere in the middle. But I just can't do it with someone who doesn't actually desire it, so I refused. I actually stopped having intimacy altogether with my wife in early 2022 because I just didn't think it was right. And she never wanted it in the first place, or really said much that I stopped. It's not like we were having much anyway at that point, maybe 4 times a year. At some point in all of this, my wife then suggested maybe if I lost weight that she would feel more intimacy attraction to me. I should have known better, but I embarked on a nearly year-long weight loss journey in which I lost 65 pounds. It was a lot of work, and I got down to a healthy BMI. Nothing changed with her intimacy desire. At this point, not only was I feeling so lonely, unwanted, and unloved due to the lack of intimacy and physical affection, not even cuddling. I know that since she is a touch-averse asexual, that was not her fault or her intention to make me feel that way. But it is how I felt. I finally also got so sexually frustrated that I asked to go outside of our relationship for intimacy and my physical needs, which she agreed to. This was originally suggested in counseling by our counselor to see if she was open to it. But at the time, while she was, I was not. I had my own kind of internal crisis where I've never had a sexually satisfying relationship. As I mentioned at the beginning, my first long-term relationship was in undergrad, and she was raised Catholic, so she had her own reservations with intimacy. My second long-term relationship was with a person who identified as asexual, and now my third long-term relationship with the person who is now my wife also turned out to be asexual. I felt like I wasted my 20s and half of my 30s having very, very little intimacy and not having a normal, I'm sorry for using that word, relationship. My wife agreed to allow me to go outside of our marriage for my physical needs. It didn't seem to faze her as she had suggested it a number of times in the past. She just asked that I didn't tell her about anything. She didn't want to know any details, so I ended up finding someone to meet my physical needs with, and it was amazing. It was the first female I'd been with that I felt like that had an intimacy drive, and it was a very high drive that matched mine. The intimacy was far from vanilla too, as we both were kink positive and got to explore so many things together that way too. It was all incredibly satisfying. The person was also super into cuddling and non-sexual touch affection too. It was also eye-opening for me, for all I was missing out on with my wife, both with intimacy and non-sexual physical touch affection. It was so confirming to me not only what I had been missing out on, but how much it can deepen a relationship and its connection between the two people. It really opened up a can of worms for me. On the other hand, and unsurprisingly, I was also becoming emotionally attached to this person due to the intimacy, physical affection, and vulnerability, etc. After a year, I ended it with that person, even though it was the best intimacy and physical affection of my life, because I feared it would blow up my marriage. I am now back to my original loneliness, emptiness, and intimacy frustration. I don't know what to do. As I mentioned early in my story, I love my wife. We are an incredible team and have built an incredible life together. We want to move to Hawaii together. I sacrificed growing in a career so that she could for hers. I feel like I've invested so much into her, and it has finally paid off. And she's invested into me too. I'm now only a year into my new career, and, as I mentioned before, it was a step back pay-wise in order to have future upward mobility. I know it would break her heart if I left her, and mine too. I don't want to blow our lives up, and I don't want to start all over either. At the same time, I feel sad and lonely, empty, touch-starved, and in need of non-sexual touch, i.e. cuddling and intimacy as well. It's hard for me to go out and have no strings attached intimacy with someone, and I end up getting attached. So I don't think it's a good option anymore. It makes me sad I can't have physical affection, i.e. cuddling or intimacy, and the connection that comes with it all in my own marriage. My wife's asexuality and touch aversion is not her fault. Feeling really down right now about it all because so many things are actually good. Thanks for listening, and I welcome your advice. Now, for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. This is such a sad story. You've done a lot of work to try to find out more about your partner. You deserve credit for that. I have had different experiences, but ones that have felt similar, and it's just sad. For example, I have a fundamental incompatibility with someone I really love over whether to have a kid. I don't know what you should do. Although I didn't grow up in a religious family, my upbringing was very sheltered. I believe this type of upbringing can leave one completely shocked and having no idea what to do when they end up in relationships where there is an incompatibility. I never imagined there were people out there who didn't want intimacy, or in my case, kids. I've had a decade of therapy, which has helped me understand the complexities of the real world. But even now, there are times when I feel behind because of my sheltered upbringing. Comment 2. God, this was a sad read. You did your best to make her sound palatable, but it sounds to me like she doesn't really give a shoot about you at all. What part of the team does she contribute to besides making more money than you? Just from what you said, she doesn't touch you, doesn't care that your needs aren't being met, cheated on you, more or less called you fat, and literally told you to go get it elsewhere. This woman is beyond checked out, and I think the only way she'd ever consider any sort of change would be if you just up and left. And even then, I think she'd just continue on with her life. If I were you, I'd call up that girl you were actually enjoying your life with and beg her to take you back. Now, for the update, thanks for the comments from last time. Things have taken a turn, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it all. Last week, my wife blindsided me with news that she was pregnant. I was stunned. We hadn't been intimate in over a year, and she's always been meticulous about her birth control. She broke down, admitting it was a one-time thing with a guy from her gaming community. She'd met him in person while I was on a business trip. The guilt had been eating her up inside, and she couldn't keep it a secret any longer. I was furious, not just because of the betrayal, but because of the hypocrisy. She'd always been the one to stress fidelity, even when she'd given me permission to seek physical comfort elsewhere. And now, she was the one who'd crossed the line in the most significant way possible. The resentment was like a living thing inside me, growing with every breath I took. The days that followed were a blur of arguments and tears. I couldn't look at her without seeing the lie our marriage had become. She begged for forgiveness, promising it was a mistake she'd never repeat. But the trust was shattered, and I couldn't see how we could ever get it back. In a moment of anger, I did something I never thought I'd do. I contacted her gaming friend. I needed answers, needed to know if it was really just a one-time mistake. But what he told me was even more shocking. They'd been having an online affair for months before it became physical. My wife, the introverted, touch-averse woman I knew, had been leading a double life. I was at a loss. The woman I'd supported through grad school, the one I'd given up my teaching career for, had been lying to me. I felt like a fool, having invested so much into someone who could betray me so easily. The aftermath was messy. I moved into the guest room, and we were like strangers passing in the hallway. The house we'd bought together, the life we'd built, it all felt like a sham. But then, another surprise dropped. My wife's new job, the one that paid so much more than mine, was in jeopardy. Her affair had been with a colleague, and when the news of her pregnancy broke, it caused a scandal at her workplace. She was fired, and suddenly, the financial stability we'd enjoyed was gone. I could have gloated, could have told her it was karma, but the satisfaction was hollow. Our lives were falling apart, and there was no joy in being right. With her job gone, the dream of moving to Hawaii vanished like smoke. We were stuck, both financially and emotionally. I started looking for teaching positions again, swallowing my pride to keep us afloat. Then, as if things couldn't get any worse, the guy from her gaming community reached out to me. He was remorseful, said he never meant to cause so much trouble. He offered to support the child financially, but he wanted no part in raising it. It was a small relief, but it didn't change the fact that my marriage was in ruins. I'm still here, living in a house that feels more like a prison than a home. My wife is a stranger to me now, her belly growing with a child that isn't mine. I'm supporting us on a teacher's salary again, and every day is a struggle. I ended up seeing a lawyer just to know my options. Divorce was on the table, but it was complicated with the pregnancy. I was torn between my desire to leave and the guilt of abandoning her when she was vulnerable. It's a mess, and I'm still figuring out what to do. I love her, or at least, I loved who I thought she was. But now I don't even know if that person ever really existed. Thanks for reading. My boyfriend of 6 years moans another woman's name while we're watching Game of Thrones. So I dump him and let karma handle the car accident. I don't care if he has a celebrity crush. I like Ryan Gosling, so he can knock himself out with whoever. My boyfriend, 29-year-old, and I, 27-year-old, of 6 years have been watching Game of Thrones over the past few weeks. He's seen it before. I asked to watch it with him. And he was reluctant because, in his words, it was more disappointing than when my dog died. But we watch things together and cuddle and kiss and sometimes have intimacy while watching them. And I wanted to see it so I could better understand House of the Dragon. So he relented, and so we were watching it. We're near the end of the third season, and I'm enjoying it a lot so far. In the episode we were last watching, there's an intimacy scene, and we've already been cuddling and kissing a bit, but we start kissing, but he tells me to watch what happens in the scene because it's important. And there's some leeches, some sucking of blood, and some burning. After this, we're half kissing, half watching. There's some more unclothedness. We start having intimacy. After a while of having intimacy with it playing in the background, I ask if we can pause it and restart when we finish, which we've done a few times. And it pauses on a fat male character's face. It's funny. My boyfriend jokes that he's not having intimacy with that guy watching us, so gets up to get rid of him. Rather than just close it, turn it off, or whatever, he rewinds it. Okay, not so much of a problem, but he rewinds it a few minutes back, specifically to show Emilia Clarke's character naked, and pauses it there. He says in a joking voice, "That's better." I laugh and try not to think about it at the time. It's not like he's going to be actually looking at the TV while we have intimacy, right? Wrong. He's glancing at the screen several times while inside me. He's freaking a lot faster than I prefer, and he knows what I prefer. I just put up with it as it's not enough to get me out of the mood. But then what follows is the absolute worst thing as he orgasms. Rather than looking me in my eyes as he does 99% of the time, he looks at her naked body and moans her name. Emilia, that is, not Khaleesi. Then looks at me expecting me to laugh at some hilarious joke. I immediately tell him that is completely unacceptable. He laughs and says it was just a joke and shrugs it off. I double down and tell him I'm pissed at him, ask him how he thinks it makes me feel, and so on. And we argue, and he continues to try and excuse it. I tell him it makes me feel awful to be compared to her because obviously she's more beautiful than I am, which he agrees with, but it's understandable because she's a beautiful actress, but okay, because he's in love with me. Also, you already knew I masturbated to her anyway. After a while of arguing, he admits he crossed a line with that, and I told him to frick off. I've texted him telling him that I don't think we should talk for a few days, and I'm thinking of calling it quits, but we'll talk when I've thought about this. Even if we stayed together, I don't think I can continue watching Goatee with him and watching her with... I already knew he masturbated over her, and I know he does with Emma Watson and Daisy Ridley too. So I feel like I can't even watch Harry Potter, which has been a big comfort film series for me. Honestly, just pissed off. I feel bad for threatening breaking up over text rather than just gathering my thoughts and saying everything in one go. What do you think, Reddit? Am I overreacting? I don't think I can manage watching any more Game of Thrones, but he didn't want to watch it anyway. Now, for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. This person ruined many things for you. They treated you poorly, like an intimacy doll. Since they have no regard for you, they can go find someone else to neglect. What they did was not amusing, it was cruel. If you want to have intimacy with him and moan Jason Momoa, that's fine. Let's be honest. Jason Momoa is much better looking than your boyfriend. Or even better, find someone who doesn't damage your self-esteem. Let him tell this story to his friends. He will soon realize what an idiot he is. Comment 2. No, this is strange. Knowing the celebrities your partner finds attractive is one thing. Knowing that they self-intimacy to them is completely different. Who even shares that information? Some things should remain private for a reason. Holy shoot, you have every right to be angry and hurt about this whole incident. Your boyfriend needs to understand that there are certain things your partner absolutely does not need to know. Now, for the update. Thanks for sticking around after my last post. So, things went from bad to worse. The silence between my boyfriend and me stretched out, and the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. I spent the first day replaying that awful moment over and over in my head, feeling a mix of anger and humiliation. I couldn't shake the image of him looking at another woman while we were intimate. It felt like a betrayal. On the second day, I tried to distract myself by going out with friends. But as we sat in the cafe, my phone buzzed with a message from him. He wanted to talk, said he missed me. I didn't reply. Instead, I listened to my friends chatting about their own relationship dramas, feeling a pang of envy at their seemingly simple issues. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about our history, the good times we'd shared. 6 years is a long time, and we'd been through a lot together. I remembered how he supported me when I lost my job, and how we'd celebrated when I got a new one. But then, I also remembered the little lies he'd told, the times he'd made me feel less than enough. It was a pattern I couldn't ignore. On the third day, I decided to confront him. We met at our favorite park, the one where we'd had our first date. It was supposed to be neutral ground, but every bench, every tree reminded me of us. He started off by apologizing, saying he realized how much he'd hurt me. But as we talked, it became clear that he didn't really understand why I was so upset. He kept saying it was just a joke, that I was overreacting. I tried to explain to make him see that it wasn't just about the incident during Game of Thrones, but about respect and trust. I told him about the shame and jealousy that had been eating at me since that night. He listened, but I could tell he was getting frustrated, defensive. Then he dropped a shocker. He admitted that he'd been messaging an ex-girlfriend. Nothing serious, he claimed, just catching up. But it was the last straw for me. The trust was broken, and I couldn't see a way back from that. I told him it was over, right there in the middle of the park. He was shocked. I could see it in his face. He tried to argue, to convince me we could work it out. But I was done. I walked away, leaving him standing there, alone. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do, but I knew it was the right decision. I went home and cried for hours, mourning the relationship and the future we'd planned together. But there was also a sense of relief, like a weight had been lifted. The next few days were tough. I avoided our usual hangouts, ignored the texts and calls from mutual friends asking what happened. I needed space to heal, to figure out who I was without him. And then, just when I thought I was starting to move on, I got a message from one of his friends. My ex had been in a car accident. Nothing life-threatening, but he was in the hospital with a broken leg. For a moment, I considered going to see him, but I knew it would only make things harder for both of us. I didn't go. Instead, I sent a brief message wishing him a speedy recovery. It was the most I could offer without compromising my own healing process. So, that's where things stand now. I'm picking up the pieces of my life, trying to move on. It's not easy, but I know it's necessary. I've learned a lot about myself and what I deserve in a relationship. And I'm hopeful that, in time, I'll find someone who respects and loves me the way I deserve to be loved. Thanks for reading. My best friend chooses her ex over me. After I warned her so, I sold the Airbnb footage and watched her regret everything. I, 19-year-old male, and my best friend, 19-year-old female, met when I was 16 years old and she was 17 years old, and she just asked me to hang out one day. Ever since, we have been amazing friends, hanging out constantly, sharing everything about ourselves and being very open. I have been friends with her through one boyfriend, about a year long, maybe 5 months after we met. After that, she talked about him so much, and I tried my best to comfort her, not out of any weird ulterior motives, but because I really do care deeply about her. She hooked up with one guy about 3 months ago and told me about it, and how much she regretted it. Again, I tried to talk her through that and not judge her at all. Though this did hurt me a bit, as for maybe the last 8 months I've developed a huge crush on her. This week we went to an Airbnb, and after getting there late in the night, about 9 p.m., we started drinking. We did everything we normally do when we drink. And although she has always been touchy when she drinks, it seemed to be a bit more that night. Eventually we made our way to the bedroom, where she fell asleep on top of me. While a bit weird, I'm horrible at taking hints, and I go to her house to sleep in her bed all the time, so I didn't think too deeply about it. After about 30 minutes, she wakes up and we cuddled, and then she began kissing me, leading into having intimacy. Afterwards, we talked about it for like an hour, just laying there holding each other. It wasn't awkward at all, and I was a virgin, so she was very communicative, and we talked through it. The next day, waking up, we stayed in bed until about 4 p.m. Crazy, I know, and talked through it, saying we don't regret it and we love each other. After getting back to the Airbnb that night, I didn't think it would happen again. although we had drank again. I was close to falling asleep when we started talking. Then, after maybe 2 minutes, she says she wants me to kiss her. We have intimacy again, and talk afterwards, too. The next day, we talked through everything, and it was not awkward at all. I couldn't believe how normal it felt to talk about it and go about our day as planned. We just got back home today and haven't talked about it since this morning. Overall, I'm scared for the future. This girl knows everything about me, and we have been extremely close for years. We get along so well. I really do value our friendship more than she knows, and I am scared how this will change it. I'm definitely not opposed to seeing where it goes, but how do I approach this situation? I'm scared to ruin the friendship, but I'm also scared to not take an opportunity to have something great, I guess. Not sure how to word this, LOL. Basically asking, what do I do now? Now for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. Let me start by saying that the friendship has already changed the moment you got physical. This does not mean that it has automatically changed for the worst. You should both talk about how you would like for this to progress. If you both are already dropping the love word and it doesn't feel awkward, then why not date her? Just don't be afraid to communicate with her. Comment 2. Let the dice roll and chips will fall where they may. Sounds like you stimulate her mind and she liked having the intimacy. Be cool, be confident, be patient. Remind her it was steamy by taking her somewhere out of her comfort zone in a week or so. A restaurant, a movie, a hike, a concert, or a museum. Keep the romance going and be super laid back. You got this. Now for the update. Thanks for sticking around for the latest. So things got really complicated after we got back from the Airbnb. We were both trying to act normal, but there was this tension, you know? We hung out at her place and she was all quiet, which is not like her at all. I could tell something was up. Then, out of nowhere, she tells me she's been offered a job. It's a great opportunity for her, but it's across the country. She's got to decide fast, and it's like this bomb just dropped on us. I didn't know what to say. Part of me was screaming inside, wanting her to stay, but I couldn't be that guy. I mean, we just crossed a line from friends to... I don't even know what to call it. But I couldn't hold her back. So I just said, "That's amazing. You should totally go for it." I could see the relief in her eyes, but also something else. Maybe doubt? We spent the next day trying to avoid the topic, just hanging out like we used to. But it wasn't the same. We were both pretending, and it was exhausting. She had to make her decision by the end of the week, and I could tell she was torn. She kept asking me what I thought, and I kept dodging the question. I didn't want to influence her choice, but I also didn't want her to leave. Then, 2 days before her deadline, she got a call from her ex. Yeah, the one she dated for a year. He heard about the job and wanted to get back together. Said he'd move with her. I saw her face light up when she talked to him, and it was like a punch in the gut. I knew she still had feelings for him, but seeing it right there in front of me was brutal. That night we had a huge fight. I couldn't keep it in anymore. I told her she was making a mistake, that he was just using her. She got mad, said I was just jealous and didn't want her to be happy. It got really ugly, and she ended up kicking me out. I felt like such a jerk. I was trying to protect her, but it came out all wrong. The next day, she texted me. She'd made her decision. She was taking the job and getting back with her ex. They were going to try long distance until he could move. I was crushed. I wanted to be happy for her, but all I felt was this hollow feeling inside. We met up one last time before she left. It was awkward and sad. We promised to stay friends, to keep in touch, but we both knew it wouldn't be the same. When she hugged me goodbye, I could barely hold it together. After she left, I just sat there for the longest time trying to figure out where it all went wrong. So that's where I'm at. She's gone, and I'm here, trying to pick up the pieces. I guess I learned the hard way that sometimes taking a risk can lead to losing everything. But life goes on, right? Thanks for reading. If you like this video, you'll probably like these too. Also, while you're here, please consider subscribing. It's your support that keeps this channel alive and allows me to make better and longer videos. Have a great day.